The bullet tore through Zachary Quinn's shoulder just as the snowflakes began their relentless descent over the Sierra Nevada mountains, and he knew with absolute certainty that Marcus Dalton had finally made good on his threat to see him dead. Blood spread across his shirt in a dark stain that reminded him of spilled wine, except wine had never felt this hot or this wrong. Zachary stumbled forward through the pine trees, his boots crunching through fresh powder as the wind howled around him like a living thing bent on his destruction. Behind him, he could hear the voices of the men who had once called themselves his friends, his partners in the mining operation that was supposed to make them all rich. Marcus had turned them against him with lies about stolen gold, about secret deals with competing claims, about betrayal that existed only in Marcus's imagination and greed. The truth was simpler and far more damning. Zachary had discovered that Marcus was watering down the payroll, stealing from the 40 men who broke their backs in the tunnels every day. When Zachary confronted him privately, gave him a chance to make it right, Marcus had smiled that cold smile and told him that accidents happened all the time in the mountains. 3 days later, Marcus called a meeting of the senior partners at an abandoned claim site 5 miles outside Lone Pine, California. Zachary rode up expecting a discussion about the books. Instead, he found 4 men with guns and accusations that painted him as the thief. He had tried to reason with them, tried to show them the evidence he had been gathering, but Marcus was persuasive, and Zachary was alone. When he turned to leave, refusing to dignify the charade with further argument, someone shot him. He did not know who pulled the trigger. He only knew that he had to run or die. Now, 2 hours into his flight through a landscape turning white and deadly, Zachary was beginning to think dying might be the easier option. His vision blurred at the edges. His fingers had gone numb, which he told himself was from the cold and not from blood loss. The temperature was dropping fast as evening approached, and he had left his heavy coat back at the claim site, never imagining he would need it for anything more than the short ride home. Home. That was a laugh. He had a room above the general store in Lone Pine, a place to sleep between long days at the mine. Nothing that counted as a real home, nothing that anyone would miss if he disappeared into these mountains and the snow covered his bones until spring. His boot caught on a hidden root, and he went down hard, face first into snow that filled his mouth and nose. For a moment, he just lay there, feeling the cold seep into his bones, feeling the exhaustion pull at him like a lover's embrace. It would be so easy to just close his eyes, so easy to let go. But Zachary Quinn had never been a man who took the easy path, and he was not about to start now, not when Marcus Dalton would get to live out his days thinking he had won. With a groan that echoed through the silent forest, Zachary pushed himself to his knees, then to his feet. He swayed, caught himself against a tree trunk, and forced himself to take another step. Then another. He did not know where he was going. The snow was falling so thick now that he could barely see 10 feet ahead. He had lost all sense of direction hours ago. He was simply moving because stopping meant death, and some stubborn part of him refused to grant Marcus that satisfaction. The cabin appeared out of the white curtain of snow, like something from a fever dream. At first, Zachary thought he was hallucinating, that his mind was conjuring shelter where none existed. But as he stumbled closer, the structure remained solid, real. It was small, weathered, with smoke rising from a stone chimney that promised warmth and life. He made it to the door before his legs finally gave out. He fell against the rough wood, his good hand scrabbling for the latch, and then he was falling forward into lamplight and warmth, and there was a woman's startled cry, and then there was nothing at all. Consciousness returned in fragments, pain in his shoulder, sharp and insistent, warmth on his skin, the smell of wood smoke, and something cooking, something that made his empty stomach clench with sudden desperate hunger. Soft fabric beneath him, softer than anything he had felt in months, and a voice, low and musical, speaking words he could not quite make out, but that sounded like a prayer. Zachary opened his eyes to find himself staring at rough-hewn ceiling beams, golden in the light of what he assumed was morning. He tried to sit up and immediately regretted it as pain lanced through his shoulder and the room spun sickeningly around him. Do not move. The voice was firm, brooking no argument, and Zachary found himself obeying before he had consciously decided to do so. A woman moved into his line of sight, and despite the pain and the confusion, Zachary felt his breath catch. She was perhaps 25 years old, with dark hair pulled back in a practical braid and eyes the color of amber honey. Her face was angular and striking rather than conventionally pretty, with high cheekbones and a mouth that looked like it smiled often, though at the moment it was pressed into a line of concentration. She wore a simple dress of dark wool, and her hands, when she reached to touch his forehead, were strong and capable. "You have been unconscious for 2 days," she said, her fingers cool against his fevered skin. "The bullet went clean through, which is fortunate, but you lost a great deal of blood and nearly froze to death besides. I was beginning to think you might not wake up at all." "Where am I?" Zachary's voice came out as a croak, his throat dry as old leather. "My cabin. About 7 miles northwest of Lone Pine, up in the high country." She moved away and returned a moment later with a tin cup of water, which she held to his lips with the practiced ease of someone who had nursed the sick before. "Drink slowly. Your stomach will not thank you if you rush it." The water was cold and clean, tasting of mountain springs, and Zachary thought he had never experienced anything so purely good in his entire life. He drank until she pulled the cup away, despite his wordless protest. "More in a few minutes," she said. "First, I need to check your shoulder." "Who are you?" Zachary asked as she pulled back the blankets that covered him. He realized with a start that he was stripped to the waist, his torso wrapped in clean white bandages. "Delilah Thompson," she said, unwrapping the bandages with gentle efficiency. "I have lived here for 3 years since my father died and left me the claim he worked for 20 years before that." "You live here alone?" The question came out before Zachary could stop it, and he immediately regretted it. It was none of his business, and besides, the answer was obvious. Delilah's mouth quirked in something that was not quite a smile. "I do. And before you ask, yes, I manage just fine. I know these mountains better than most of the men in Lone Pine, and I can shoot well enough to keep the wolves at bay, both the 4-legged and the 2-legged kind." Zachary believed her. There was something in the set of her shoulders, the directness of her gaze, that spoke of competence and strength. She was not some delicate flower waiting for a man to rescue her. If anything, she was the one doing the rescuing. "The wound looks good," Delilah said, examining his shoulder with a critical eye. "No signs of infection, and it is healing cleanly. You are very lucky. Another hour in that snow, and you would have been past any help I could give." "Thank you." The words felt inadequate, too small for what she had done, but Zachary did not know what else to say. "You saved my life." "Yes, well, I could hardly leave you to die on my doorstep. It would have been inconvenient come spring." But her eyes were kind as she said it, taking the sting from the words. She began rewrapping his shoulder with fresh bandages, her touch gentle but sure. "Do you want to tell me who shot you, and why?" Zachary hesitated. The whole story felt too long, too complicated, and he was so tired. But she deserved some explanation, this woman who had taken him in and tended his wounds. "My business partner accused me of something I did not do. He convinced the others I was stealing from them. When I tried to leave, someone put a bullet in me." "Did you? Steal from them, I mean." "No." Zachary met her eyes steadily. "But I found out he was stealing from our workers. I confronted him about it. He decided to solve the problem by getting rid of me." Delilah studied his face for a long moment, and Zachary had the strange feeling she could see right through him, could read every truth and lie he had ever told. Finally, she nodded. "I believe you. There is a look men get when they are lying, a shift in their eyes. You do not have it." She finished tying off the bandage and pulled the blankets back up. "Rest now. I will bring you some broth in a little while. You need to build your strength back slowly." "I need to get out of here," Zachary said, though even as he spoke, he knew it was impossible. He could barely lift his head, much less walk 7 miles through mountain snow. "I am putting you in danger. If Marcus finds out I am here, then I will handle it," Delilah interrupted. "But he will not find out, because no one knows about this cabin except me, and I have not been down to town in over a week. You are safe here, Mr. Quinn. Let yourself heal." "How did you know my name?" She smiled then, a real smile that transformed her entire face. "You were delirious with fever the first night, talking in your sleep. You told me all sorts of interesting things. Your name, your partner's name, details about the mine. I had quite the one-sided conversation with you." Zachary felt heat rise in his cheeks that had nothing to do with fever. "I hope I did not say anything too embarrassing." "Nothing that will not remain between these walls," Delilah assured him. Now rest. That is not a request." She moved away before he could respond, busying herself with something at the stove in the corner of the cabin. Zachary let his eyes drift closed, meaning only to rest them for a moment, but exhaustion pulled him down into sleep before he could fight it. When he woke again, the light had changed, grown softer and more golden. Delilah sat in a chair beside the bed, mending what looked like a shirt by lamplight. She looked up when he stirred, setting aside her sewing. "Welcome back," she said. "Are you ready for that broth now?" Zachary's stomach answered before he could, growling audibly. Delilah laughed, a sound that seemed to fill the small cabin with warmth, and rose to ladle steaming liquid from a pot that hung over the fire. The broth was rich with the flavor of venison and herbs, and Zachary sipped it slowly, forcing himself to follow Delilah's earlier advice despite the urge to gulp it down. "This is delicious," he said between sips. "Thank you." "My father's recipe," Delilah said, settling back into her chair. "He taught me to hunt and cook and survive up here on my own. Some people in town think it is unseemly, a woman living alone in the mountains, but I do not much care what they think." "Why stay?" Zachary asked. "If you do not mind my asking, it must be lonely." Delilah was quiet for a moment, her gaze drifting to the window where snow was falling again, soft and steady. "Because it is mine," she said finally. "My father spent half his life working this claim, dreaming of striking it rich. He never did, not really, but he found enough to keep going, to keep hoping. When he died, everyone expected me to sell and move back east where I came from. But this is home now. These mountains, this cabin, even the damn snow. It is hard and it is lonely sometimes. But it is mine, and no one can take it from me." There was a fierceness in her voice that Zachary understood in his bones. He had grown up poor in Chicago, scraping and fighting for every scrap, and when he had finally saved enough to go west and try his luck in the mines, it had felt like claiming a piece of the future for himself, until Marcus Dalton had tried to steal it all away. "I understand that," Zachary said quietly. "More than you might think." Delilah met his eyes, and something passed between them, some unspoken recognition. "I expect you do," she said. Over the following days, Zachary grew stronger. The fever broke completely, and with Delilah's help, he was able to sit up without the room spinning. She changed his bandages twice a day, checking the wound with a practiced eye that made him wonder where she had learned such skill. "My mother was a nurse in the war," Delilah explained when he asked. "She taught me before she passed, said that knowing how to tend the sick and injured was as important as knowing how to read or write. I have had cause to be grateful for those lessons more than once up here." "Have you had to nurse many mysterious strangers back to health?" Zachary asked, aiming for levity. Delilah smiled. "Just one so far, though I did have to set my own leg 2 years back when I fell from a ledge. That was an experience I do not care to repeat." "You set your own broken leg?" "Fractured, not broken, though I will admit I did not know the difference at the time." She said it matter-of-factly, as though it were no more remarkable than baking bread. "I was laid up here for 6 weeks, nearly went mad from the boredom." Zachary found himself fascinated by her, by the contradictions she represented. She was beautiful but seemed unaware of it, capable but not boastful, strong but not hard. She spoke little of her past, but what she did reveal painted a picture of a woman who had known loss and hardship, and had come through it with her spirit intact. He found himself watching her as she moved around the cabin, noting the economical grace of her movements, the way lamplight caught in her hair, the rare smiles that crossed her face when she was concentrating on something. And sometimes he would look up to find her watching him in return, her amber eyes thoughtful and warm. By the end of the first week, Zachary was able to stand and walk a few steps, though he tired quickly and his shoulder ached with a deep, grinding pain that Delilah assured him would fade with time. She helped him to the table for meals, and they fell into an easy rhythm of conversation that surprised them both. "Tell me about Chicago," Delilah said one evening, as they ate a stew she had made from salt pork and dried vegetables. "Is it as grand as they say?" "It is big," Zachary said, "and loud and filthy. But there is energy there, a sense that anything is possible. I worked in the stockyards from the time I was 12, saved every penny I could. Took me 10 years to save enough to come west, but I knew if I stayed, I would die there, probably in some accident or from the cholera that swept through every few years." "Do you have family there?" Zachary shook his head. "My mother died when I was young. My father drank himself to death a few years later. I had some cousins, but we lost touch after I left. I sent letters for the first year or so, but they never wrote back. I suppose they figured I had gotten above myself, heading west like I was somebody. I am sorry, Delilah said softly. Do not be. I made my choice and I do not regret it. Well, most of it anyway. I could have done without the bullet. That drew a laugh from her, bright and unexpected. Yes, I imagine that was not part of your plan. Definitely not, Zachary agreed. He paused, then asked, What about you? You said you came from back east. Where? Boston, Delilah said. My father was a clerk for a shipping company, respectable but not well off. When my mother died, something broke in him. He sold everything we owned, bought a wagon and supplies, and brought me west. I was 19 years old and thought he had gone mad, but he was chasing a dream and I was all he had left, so I came with him. Do you ever regret it? Not for a moment. Delilah's voice was firm. Oh, it was hard at first, harder than I ever imagined anything could be. The journey nearly killed us both. But when we got here, when I saw these mountains for the first time, I felt something I had never felt in Boston. I felt free. Zachary understood that too. The West did that to people, stripped away the old rules and expectations and let them become whoever they had the courage to be. It was why he had come, why he had endured the stockyards and the violence of the journey and the back-breaking work of the mines. He had wanted to be free of the boy he had been, the poor Irish kid with no prospects and no future. He had wanted to be Zachary Quinn, his own man, beholden to no one. And then Marcus Dalton had taken that freedom and twisted it into a noose. What will you do? Delilah asked, as though reading his thoughts. When you are healed, I mean. You cannot go back to Lone Pine. This Marcus and his men will be looking for you. I know. Zachary had been thinking about little else in the quiet hours when Delilah was busy with chores, and he was left alone with his thoughts. I suppose I will have to move on, find work somewhere else. Maybe head up to Nevada, try my luck in the Comstock, or go south to Arizona. Is that what you want? It was such a simple question, but it hit Zachary like a punch to the gut. What did he want? A month ago, he would have said he wanted to make the mine work, to prove himself, to build something that mattered, but Marcus had taken that dream and turned it to ash. Now, lying in this cabin with this remarkable woman nursing him back to health, Zachary found he did not know what he wanted anymore. I want justice, he said finally. I want those workers to know the truth about what Marcus did to them. I want him to pay for stealing from men who can barely feed their families. But I do not know how to make that happen without getting myself killed in the process. Delilah was quiet for a long moment, her eyes distant. Then she said, My father used to say that the West was built by people who were too stubborn to quit, even when quitting was the smart thing to do. He said that stubborn and stupid looked the same from the outside, but the difference was whether you succeeded or not. That sounds like permission to do something reckless. Maybe it is, Delilah said with a small smile. But you do not strike me as the kind of man who is going to just walk away and let Marcus Dalton win. So, if you are going to do something reckless anyway, you might as well do it with a plan. And do you have a plan? Not yet, she admitted. But we have time to think of one while you heal, unless you are in a hurry to leave. There was something in the way she said it, a carefully casual tone that did not quite hide the hope underneath, and Zachary felt something warm unfurl in his chest. She wanted him to stay. This strong, capable woman who needed no one wanted him to stay. I am not in any hurry, Zachary said, holding her gaze. Not if you do not mind the company. I do not mind, Delilah said softly. Truth be told, it is nice having someone to talk to besides myself. I have been accused of talking to my horse more than is strictly proper. You have a horse? In the lean-to around back, a mare named Constance. She is stubborn and opinionated, but she knows these mountains as well as I do. You will meet her when you are strong enough to walk that far. The days blended together in a way that felt both strange and natural. Zachary grew stronger, his shoulder healing with the clean, steady progress that Delilah's careful tending made possible. He began helping with small tasks around the cabin, chopping vegetables for their meals, mending things that needed mending, keeping the fire fed. It felt good to be useful again, to contribute something to the woman who had saved his life. And as he healed, he found himself falling into something he had not expected, something that both thrilled and terrified him. He was falling for Delilah Thompson. It happened slowly, in 100 small moments, the way she hummed while she cooked, old songs he did not recognize, but that made him feel at peace. The way she read in the evenings, her lips moving slightly as she worked through the worn books that lined a shelf her father had built. The way she looked at him sometimes when she thought he was not paying attention, her eyes soft with something that might have been hope or might have been longing. He learned the map of her face in firelight and morning sun, the small scar on her chin from a childhood fall, the constellation of freckles across her nose that she had gotten from too many days working outside without a bonnet. The way her whole face lit up when she laughed, which she did more and more often as the days passed. They talked about everything and nothing. She told him about her childhood in Boston, about sneaking into her father's study to read his books, about the scandal when she had been caught attending a lecture on women's suffrage. He told her about the stockyards, about the rough men he had worked beside, about the day he had seen an advertisement for laborers needed in the California mines and had decided, on the spot, to go west. "Were you scared?" Delilah asked one night as they sat before the fire, the wind howling outside. "Terrified," Zachary admitted. "I had never been further than 10 miles from where I was born. The journey west was the hardest thing I had ever done. We lost people along the way, good people. There were times I thought I had made the worst mistake of my life. But you did not turn back. No, because turning back felt like giving up on myself, on the future I could have if I was brave enough to reach for it." He looked at her, at the way the firelight painted gold across her features. "Your father was right, you know, about people being too stubborn to quit. That is exactly what I was, too stubborn to admit I had made a mistake, even when the smart thing would have been to go home." "I am glad you were stubborn," Delilah said quietly. "If you had turned back, you never would have ended up here. Here, getting shot and nearly frozen to death. I am not sure that is a point in favor of stubbornness. Here, sitting by my fire, talking to me." Delilah's voice was soft but steady. "I am glad you are here, Zachary. Even if the circumstances were terrible, I am glad." His heart did something complicated in his chest, a stuttering skip that had nothing to do with his injury and everything to do with the woman sitting across from him. "I am glad too," he said, and meant it more than he had ever meant anything. The moment stretched between them, heavy with things unsaid, and then Delilah stood abruptly, smoothing her skirts. "It is late. You should rest. Doctor's orders." "Yes, madam," Zachary said with a small smile, and he did not miss the way her cheeks flushed before she turned away. 2 weeks after Zachary had stumbled into her cabin, Delilah declared him well enough to venture outside. The sun was shining for the first time in days, turning the snow-covered landscape into a glittering wonderland that hurt to look at. Zachary stood in the doorway, breathing in air so cold and clean it made his lungs ache, and felt something very close to happiness. "Come meet Constance," Delilah said, leading him around to the back of the cabin, where a sturdy lean-to sheltered a dappled gray mare. The horse looked up at their approach and whickered softly, nosing at Delilah's pockets in search of treats. "You spoil her," Zachary observed, as Delilah produced a wrinkled apple from somewhere in her coat. "She deserves it. She has saved my life more than once in these mountains." Delilah fed the apple to the mare, who crunched it contentedly. "Want to try?" Zachary approached slowly, letting the horse get his scent. Constance regarded him with liquid dark eyes that seemed to take his measure, and then she bumped her nose against his chest in what he chose to interpret as approval. "She likes you," Delilah said, sounding pleased. "She does not like everyone. There was a man from town who came up here once trying to buy my claim. Constance tried to bite him." "Good judge of character," Zachary said, stroking the mare's neck. Her coat was thick with winter growth, soft under his palm. They stood there in the cold sunshine, both of them petting the horse, and Zachary was acutely aware of how close Delilah was standing, close enough that he could smell the faint scent of herbs and wood smoke that clung to her hair. He wanted to reach out, to close the small distance between them, but he held himself still. She had saved his life and given him shelter. Taking advantage of her kindness was something Marcus Dalton would do, not him. As if sensing his thoughts, Delilah turned to look at him, and whatever she saw in his face made her breath catch. For a moment, They just stood there, inches apart, while Constance munched hay in the background. "Zachary," Delilah said, his name barely a whisper. "I should not," he said, as much to himself as to her. "It would not be right. You saved my life. I am a guest in your home. I do not want you to think that I am the kind of man who would take advantage. What if I want you to?" The words came out in a rush, color flooding Delilah's cheeks even as she held his gaze. "What if I want you to kiss me, to hold me? What if I have been thinking about it for days, and I am tired of pretending I have not?" Zachary's heart was beating so hard, he thought she must be able to hear it. "Are you sure? I have never been more sure of anything in my life." That was all the permission he needed. Zachary cupped her face in his hands, marveling at the softness of her skin, and kissed her. She made a small sound of surprise or pleasure or both, and then she was kissing him back, her arms coming up to wind around his neck. It was not a gentle kiss. It was weeks of tension and unspoken feelings and desire finally given permission to exist. Delilah tasted like coffee and something sweet, and Zachary thought dimly that he could kiss her forever, and it still would not be enough. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Delilah was smiling, a brilliant, joyful smile that made her look years younger. "That was worth waiting for," she said. "We can do it again if you want," Zachary offered, and she laughed and pulled him close. They went back inside before the cold could seep through their coats, but something had shifted between them. Some wall had come down. That night, after supper, Delilah sat beside him instead of across from him, her shoulder pressed against his good side, and they read together from one of her books, her voice soft and musical as she told him about far-off places neither of them had ever seen. "Do you think you will ever go to these places?" Zachary asked when she paused to turn a page. "Paris, London, Rome?" "I used to think I would," Delilah said. "When I was young, I imagined myself as a great traveler, seeing the world. But then, my father brought me west, and I discovered that I did not need distant cities to feel alive. These mountains give me everything those places promised: beauty, adventure, freedom." "You are unlike anyone I have ever met," Zachary said, turning so he could see her face. "Do you know that?" "I could say the same about you." Delilah set the book aside and shifted to face him fully. "Most men would have given up when Marcus betrayed them. They would have run away, started over somewhere new. But you want to go back, to fight for what is right, even though it could cost you everything. That takes courage. Or stupidity. I have been told they look the same from the outside." Delilah smiled. "Then I suppose we will find out which one it is when we put our plan into action." "Our plan?" Zachary raised an eyebrow. "I thought you were staying out of it." "That was before," Delilah said simply. "Now things are different. You are not alone anymore, Zachary. Whatever we do together." Something warm and fierce bloomed in Zachary's chest, something that felt dangerously close to love. "Are you sure? This is not your fight." "It is if I choose to make it mine," Delilah said, her chin lifting in that stubborn way he was coming to know. "Besides, Marcus Dalton and men like him have been pushing people around in this territory for too long. Someone needs to stand up to them. Why not us?" "Why not us indeed?" Zachary murmured, and kissed her again because he could, because she was letting him, because the alternative was trying to find words for the feelings rising in him like a flood. They spent the next few days planning. Delilah knew more about the workings of Lone Pine than Zachary had expected, including the fact that Marcus Dalton had a reputation for shady dealings that went back years. "The problem is that he is rich, and he has friends in high places," Delilah explained as they sat at her table with paper spread between them, making notes and diagrams. "The sheriff is in his pocket, as are most of the town council. You cannot just walk in and accuse him. He will have you arrested or killed before you can say a word." "So we need proof," Zachary said. "Proof that is so clear, so undeniable, that even his friends cannot ignore it. Which means you need to get into his office and find the real books, the ones that show what he has been stealing. Easier said than done. The office is in town, above the assay office, and there are always people around during the day. At night, it is locked up tight." Delilah tapped her pencil against the table, thinking. What about the mine itself? Would he keep records there? Maybe. Zachary frowned, trying to remember the layout of the mine office. "There is a safe in the main office where we kept the payroll and important documents. If Marcus is keeping 2 sets of books, the real ones would be in there. Can you open it? I know the combination, or at least I knew it 2 weeks ago. If Marcus has changed it, we are out of luck. It is a place to start, Delilah said. When is the mine least busy? Sunday mornings. Most of the men go to church or sleep off Saturday night in town. There is usually just one guard on duty, mostly to make sure no one tries to steal equipment or jump the claim. So we go on a Sunday. You get into the office, open the safe, find the books. We take them to someone who cannot be bought by Marcus, someone with real authority. Like who? Zachary asked. Everyone in Lone Pine either works for Marcus or is scared of him. Delilah smiled. But we are not in Lone Pine. We are 7 miles out, which means we are closer to Independence than to town. The federal marshal for this district operates out of Independence. He does not answer to the town council or to Marcus Dalton. If we can get the evidence to him, he can act on it. Zachary felt a spark of hope for the first time since Marcus had betrayed him. That could work. It is risky, but it could work. All the best plans are risky, Delilah said. If they were not, everyone would do them. They spent the rest of the evening refining the details, planning for contingencies, trying to think through everything that could go wrong. By the time they finished, it was late, and Zachary's shoulder was aching from the long day of activity. You should rest, Delilah said, seeing him wince as he stretched. We have a few more days before Sunday. You need to be strong enough to ride and to handle trouble if it comes looking. Are you always this practical? Zachary asked, but he was smiling. Someone has to be, and it clearly is not going to be you, rushing off to confront claim jumpers and thieves. That is fair, Zachary admitted. He stood, meaning to head to the bed that had been his for the past 2 weeks, but Delilah caught his hand. Zachary, she said, and there was something vulnerable in her voice that made him stop. Promise me something. Promise me that if this goes wrong, if things get dangerous, you will run. Do not try to be a hero. Just run and get somewhere safe. Only if you promise the same thing, he said. I promise. She squeezed his hand. We survive first. Be heroes second. Deal? Deal. But even as he said it, Zachary knew that if it came down to a choice between his safety and hers, he would break that promise in a heartbeat. He was falling in love with Delilah Thompson, if he had not already fallen completely, and the thought of anything happening to her was unbearable. The next days were both too long and too short. They prepared carefully, checking and rechecking their plan, but there were also stolen moments between the preparations. Moments when Zachary would catch Delilah watching him with soft eyes, or when she would reach for his hand as they sat by the fire. They kissed more, learning the shape and feel of each other, and every kiss felt like a promise of something more, something neither of them was quite ready to name, but both could feel growing between them. On Saturday evening, the night before they would attempt to get the evidence they needed, Delilah made a special dinner of roasted venison and the last of her preserved vegetables. They ate slowly, neither of them in a hurry to reach the end of the meal and the beginning of the next day. I have been thinking, Delilah said, as they cleaned up together, moving around the small cabin with the easy familiarity of people who had learned to share space. About what happens after. If we succeed, I mean. What about it? Zachary dried the tin plate she handed him, fitting it back onto the shelf. Marcus will be arrested, presumably. His assets will be seized or redistributed. The mine will need new management. She paused, her hands stilling in the wash water. You could go back. Take your place there again. It is what you wanted, is it not? To build something, to make the mine work. I thought it was, Zachary said slowly. But that was before. Before what? He set down the towel and turned to face her fully. Before you. Before I learned what it was like to wake up every morning to your smile. Before I knew that there were people in the world like you, people who make you want to be better than you are. Before I realized that success means nothing if you have no one to share it with. Delilah's eyes were bright, though whether with tears or reflected lamplight, he could not tell. What are you saying? I am saying that if we survive tomorrow, if we somehow pull this off and Marcus is stopped and justice is served, I do not want to go back to the mine. I want to stay here, with you, if you will have me. I want to help you work your father's claim and learn these mountains and build a life that means something. He took a breath. I am saying that I am in love with you, Delilah Thompson, and I do not want to spend another day without you if I can help it. The tears spilled over then, tracking down her cheeks, but she was smiling, a brilliant, tremulous smile that made his heart stutter. "I am in love with you too," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I think I started falling the moment you collapsed through my door, bleeding and freezing and still too stubborn to die. I tried to tell myself it was just gratitude, just loneliness, but I was lying. This is real, Zachary. What I feel for you is real." He crossed the small distance between them in 2 strides and pulled her into his arms, careful of his healing shoulder, and kissed her like he was trying to memorize the feel of her. She clung to him, kissing him back with equal fervor, and for a long moment, the world narrowed down to just the 2 of them. Just this. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Delilah rested her forehead against his chest. "We are going to get through tomorrow," she said fiercely. "We are going to succeed, and then we are going to have the rest of our lives to figure out everything else. Promise me you believe that." "I promise," Zachary said, even though fear was a cold knot in his stomach. He had been shot and betrayed once already. Going back into Marcus Dalton's territory felt like walking into a lion's den. But he had Delilah beside him now, and that made all the difference. "We are going to be fine." They held each other for a long time, neither willing to be the first to let go, and when they finally parted for the night, it was with lingering touches and soft promises whispered in the darkness. Sunday morning dawned clear and cold, the sky a brilliant blue that seemed to mock the dangerous nature of what they were about to attempt. They rose early, ate a quiet breakfast, and prepared to leave. Delilah had insisted on coming with him, and though Zachary had argued at first, he had to admit that her knowledge of the territory and her steady courage would be assets if things went wrong. They saddled Constance together, loading the mare with supplies including rope, a lantern, and the gun that Delilah kept above her door. Zachary wore his own gun, retrieved from the pockets of his coat, where Delilah had stored it after he collapsed. It felt heavy and foreign on his hip after weeks without it, but also reassuring. The ride to the mine took most of the morning. They moved slowly, staying off the main trails and keeping to the tree line, where they were less likely to be seen. Delilah led the way with the confidence of someone who knew every rock and ravine, and Zachary followed, marveling at her competence. As they drew closer to the mine, Zachary felt his nerves tighten. Everything looked exactly as he remembered, from the tall timber frame marking the main shaft to the cluster of rough buildings that served as offices and storage. A thin stream of smoke rose from the guard shack, indicating that someone was indeed on duty. "We need to get past the guard," Zachary murmured as they crouched behind a stand of pine trees, studying the layout. "He will be in the shack, probably half asleep if I know Tommy Reeves. But if he sees us, he will raise the alarm." "Can you distract him?" Delilah asked. "Get him to leave his post long enough for us to slip into the office?" "Maybe. Tommy always had a weakness for whiskey. If I could get close enough to offer him a drink." "Too risky. He might recognize you." Delilah bit her lip, thinking. "What if I approach him? I could pretend to be lost, ask for directions. While he is talking to me, you slip around to the office." "Absolutely not. If he realizes who you are, if he connects you to me." "He will not," Delilah interrupted. "I have only been to town a handful of times in 3 years, and I never had dealings with anyone at the mine. As far as Tommy Reeves knows, I am just some woman who got turned around in the mountains. Trust me, Zachary, this will work." He did not like it, did not like the idea of her putting herself at risk, but he could see the determination in her eyes and knew she would not be swayed. "All right," he said reluctantly. "But if anything goes wrong, if he so much as looks at you funny, you run. Promise me." "I promise. Now get into position. Give me 5 minutes, then start moving toward the office." Delilah slipped away before he could say anything else, moving through the trees with practiced silence. Zachary watched her go, his heart in his throat, and then forced himself to focus on the task at hand. He circled around through the forest, keeping low and quiet, until he had a clear view of both the guard shack and the office building. Through the grimy window of the shack, he could see Tommy Reeves sitting at a small table, playing solitaire with a battered deck of cards. He looked bored and cold, his attention entirely on his game. Then Delilah appeared, walking Constance into the clearing as though she had just emerged from the trail. She called out a greeting, her voice carrying clearly in the cold air, and Tommy looked up in surprise. Zachary used the distraction to move. He crossed the open ground to the office at a run, keeping low, his boots crunching in the snow. Every second felt like an eternity, but he made it to the building without raising an alarm. The door was locked, but he had expected that. He pulled out the knife Delilah had lent him and worked it into the gap between door and frame, applying pressure until the simple latch gave way with a soft click. Inside, the office was dark and cold, smelling of old paper and dust. Zachary moved quickly to the safe, a squat iron box tucked into the corner behind the desk. His hands were shaking as he spun the dial, trying to remember the combination: left to 15, right to 8, left to 23. He held his breath and pulled the handle. It opened. Relief flooded through him so intensely he felt dizzy. Inside the safe were stacks of papers, bags of gold dust, and 2 leather-bound ledgers. Zachary grabbed the ledgers and flipped through them quickly. One was the public record, the one that showed normal, if somewhat meager, profits from the mine. The other told a different story entirely. It showed systematic theft going back months, money skimmed from payroll, gold dust that disappeared before it could be recorded, deals with other mines that transferred funds into accounts under Marcus Dalton's name. It was everything they needed, everything that would prove Marcus was a thief and a liar. Zachary tucked both ledgers under his coat and turned to leave, but as he reached the door, he heard voices outside. Multiple voices, including one he recognized with a sinking sense of dread. Marcus Dalton. "What is a woman doing up here alone?" Marcus was saying, his tone suspicious. "This is private property, miss. You need to leave." "I was just asking for directions," Delilah said, her voice calm despite what must have been racing fear. "I got turned around in the snow and saw the smoke from your fire. I will go now." "Wait." Marcus's voice sharpened. "I know you. You are Thompson's daughter, the one living up in the high country. What are you really doing here?" Zachary's blood turned to ice. He moved to the window, peering out carefully. Marcus stood in the center of the clearing with 3 other men, all of them armed. Delilah was still on Constance, but the men had formed a loose circle around her, blocking any escape. "I told you I was lost," Delilah said, but her hand had moved to rest on her coat, near where Zachary knew she kept her gun. "You do not get lost in your own mountains," Marcus said. "Tommy, check the office. Make sure nothing has been disturbed." There was no time to think, only to act. Zachary slipped out the back door of the office just as he heard Tommy's boots on the front steps. He circled around, staying low, trying to figure out how to reach Delilah without getting them both killed. Then Delilah made the decision for him. In one smooth motion, she drew her gun and fired a shot into the air. Constance reared, scattering the men around her, and Delilah dug her heels into the mare's flanks, sending her charging forward. Zachary ran to intercept her, his own gun drawn, providing covering fire as she thundered past. She leaned down, reaching for him, and he grabbed her arm and swung up behind her with a strength born of desperation. Constance did not break stride, carrying them both toward the tree line as bullets began to fly. They crashed into the forest, branches whipping at their faces, the sound of pursuit loud behind them. Delilah leaned low over Constance's neck, guiding the mare with expert precision through terrain that would have broken most horses' legs. Zachary clung to her waist, the ledgers pressed between them, and prayed that they would make it out of this alive. "Did you get them?" Delilah shouted over the thunder of hooves. "Yes, both books. Then we just need to stay alive long enough to deliver them." Easier said than done. Behind them, Zachary could hear the sounds of horses being saddled, of men shouting orders. Marcus would be coming after them with everything he had, and unlike Zachary and Delilah, his men knew these trails and would be fresh and ready to ride. "We cannot outrun them," Zachary yelled. "Not double-mounted like this." "I know a place," Delilah called back. "A cave about 2 miles north. We can lose them there. Wait until dark to move again." It was their best option, maybe their only option. Zachary tightened his grip on Delilah's waist and held on as Constance carried them deeper into the wilderness, away from the mine and the men who wanted them dead. The cave, Delilah remembered, was really more of an overhang, a deep indentation in a cliff face that provided shelter from the elements and concealment from anyone searching the trails below. They reached it just as the sound of pursuit grew close enough to be dangerous. Delilah guided Constance into the shadows, and they dismounted quickly, pulling the mare as far back into the overhang as possible. They waited in tense silence as the sounds of horses and men passed below them, so close that Zachary could hear Marcus Dalton cursing, swearing vengeance on the man who had dared to steal from him. The irony would have been funny if their situation were not so dire. After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, the sounds faded as the search moved further down the mountain. Zachary let out a breath he had not realized he was holding. "Are you all right?" he asked Delilah, turning to check her for injuries. Her face was flushed with exertion and fear, but she seemed unharmed. "I am fine. You?" "My shoulder hurts like hell, but I will live." He pulled the ledgers from his coat, checking to make sure they had not been damaged in the wild ride. "We did it. We actually did it." "We are not safe yet," Delilah cautioned, but she was smiling despite the gravity of their situation. "We still need to get to Independence and find the marshal. Marcus will be watching the main trails." "Then we do not take the main trails. Can we reach Independence by going cross-country?" Delilah considered. "It will take longer, probably most of the day, and we will have to lead Constance through some rough terrain. But yes, we can do it. We should wait until evening, though. Let Marcus tire himself out searching. He will expect us to run, to try to put as much distance as possible between us and the mine. He will not expect us to hole up and wait." "You are brilliant, you know that?" Zachary said, and kissed her, quick and hard. When they broke apart, Delilah was blushing. "Save the praise for when we are actually safe. For now, we wait." They settled into the back of the cave, with Constance standing watch near the entrance. Zachary wrapped his coat around Delilah's shoulders despite her protests, and they sat close together for warmth as the afternoon wore on. Despite the danger, despite the fear, Zachary felt strangely at peace. He was with Delilah, they had the evidence they needed, and somehow, against all odds, they were still alive. "Can I ask you something?" Delilah said after a while, her voice quiet in the stillness. "Anything. When this is over, when Marcus is in custody and you are cleared of wrongdoing, what will you do? Really, I mean. Will you want to stay in these mountains, or will you regret giving up your chance to run the mine?" Zachary was quiet for a moment, thinking about her question seriously. "I meant what I said last night," he finally answered, "about wanting to stay with you. I do not need the mine, Delilah. I do not need to be important or to make my fortune. I just need a life that matters, with someone who matters, and I have found that with you. Even though my cabin is small and cold and miles from anywhere, even though the work is hard and the winters are harsh and I talk to my horse. Especially because of all that," Zachary said. "You have something I spent years searching for and never found in the mine. You have peace, Delilah. You have a life that is yours, that you built with your own hands. That is worth more than all the gold in California." Delilah leaned her head on his shoulder, and he felt her take a shaky breath. "I was so afraid you would say you wanted to go back," she admitted. "That once the danger was past and you were healed, you would realize you did not want a life like mine, that you would leave." "Never," Zachary said fiercely. "I am not going anywhere without you. If you decide you want to leave these mountains tomorrow, I will go with you. If you want to stay here for the next 50 years, I will stay too. Wherever you are, that is where I want to be." 50 years, Delilah mused. "That is a long time." "Not long enough," Zachary said, and meant it. They waited until the sun was low on the horizon, painting the snow-covered landscape in shades of orange and gold, before they ventured out of the cave. Moving cross-country was slow and treacherous work. They had to lead Constance through steep ravines and across frozen streams, always keeping watch for any sign of Marcus and his men. But Delilah's knowledge of the terrain proved invaluable. She navigated by landmarks only she could see, and slowly, painfully, they made progress toward Independence. Night fell, and the temperature dropped, but they kept moving. They could not risk a fire, could not risk anything that might give away their position. Instead, they huddled together during brief rests, sharing body heat and water from Delilah's canteen, and pushed on through sheer force of will. It was well after midnight when they finally saw the lights of Independence in the valley below. The town was larger than Lone Pine, a proper settlement with a main street and numerous buildings. More importantly, it had law enforcement that answered to the federal government rather than local interests. They made their way carefully down the last slope and into town, leading Constance through deserted streets to the building that served as the marshal's office. A lamp burned in the window, and when Zachary knocked on the door, it was opened by a tall, grizzled man with a star pinned to his vest. "Marshal," Zachary said, and was embarrassed by how his voice shook. "My name is Zachary Quinn. I have evidence of theft and fraud at the Golden Promise mine outside Lone Pine. I need your help." The marshal, whose name turned out to be William Ross, listened to their story with a face like carved granite. When Zachary produced the ledgers, Ross took them and spent a long time studying the entries by lamplight, comparing the two books page by page. "This is damning," he finally said, looking up at Zachary and Delilah with sharp eyes. "If these books are genuine, Marcus Dalton has been stealing from his workers for months. But I need to verify this information. I need to talk to the other men at the mine, see if their accounts match these records." "Marcus will try to buy them off or scare them into silence," Zachary warned. "Not if I get to them first," Ross said grimly. He stood, reaching for his coat. "I am going to wake up my deputies, and we are riding to Lone Pine at first light. I want both of you to stay here, where I know you are safe. Miss Thompson, there is a boarding house 2 streets over, run by a woman named Mrs. Henderson. Tell her I sent you, and she will give you a room, no questions asked." "What about Marcus?" Delilah asked. "What if he comes looking for us here?" "Then he will have to go through me and the full authority of the United States government," Ross said. "And I do not think he is quite that stupid." They left the marshal's office in a daze, hardly able to believe that their desperate plan had actually worked. The boarding house was warm and clean, and Mrs. Henderson, a motherly woman in her 60s, took one look at their exhausted faces and showed them to a room without asking for money or explanations. "Marshal Ross will settle accounts with me," she said kindly. "You two look like you could use a hot meal and about 12 hours of sleep. I will bring something up shortly." When she left, Zachary and Delilah looked at each other, and suddenly they were both laughing, great gasping laughs that were half hysteria and half relief. They collapsed onto the bed together, clinging to each other, and the laughter turned into tears, which turned back into laughter. "We did it," Delilah said, her face pressed against his chest. "I cannot believe we actually did it." "We make a good team," Zachary said, stroking her hair. "Remind me never to bet against you." "Noted," she said, and then she was kissing him, and he was kissing her back, and everything else fell away. Mrs. Henderson knocked a polite while later with a tray of food, which they ate ravenously, suddenly aware of how long it had been since they had last eaten. Then, fully clothed and too tired to care about propriety, they fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, safe for the first time in what felt like forever. Marshal Ross returned 2 days later with news that Marcus Dalton had been arrested, along with 2 of his senior partners who had been complicit in the theft. The ledgers, combined with testimony from workers at the mine who confirmed the discrepancies in their pay, were more than enough evidence to ensure charges would be filed. Marcus would face trial in the territorial court, and if convicted, would spend years in prison. "You did a brave thing," Ross told Zachary as they sat in his office, finalizing the last of the paperwork. "Most men would have just cut their losses and moved on. You stood up for people who could not stand up for themselves." "I had help," Zachary said, glancing at Delilah, who sat beside him. "I could not have done any of this without her." "That may be true, but you were the one who chose to fight rather than run. That counts for something." Ross leaned back in his chair. "What are your plans now? I expect the mine will need new management, and the other partners will be looking for someone they can trust." Zachary shook his head. "I appreciate the offer, truly, but I am done with mining. I have other plans." Ross raised an eyebrow, but did not press. "Well, if you change your mind, the offer stands. In the meantime, you are free to go. Your name has been cleared, and there are no charges against you. Miss Thompson, thank you for your assistance in this matter. Your father would be proud of what you did." Delilah's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back and nodded. "Thank you, Marshal." They left Independence that afternoon, riding Constance back into the mountains toward the cabin that had been Zachary's salvation and refuge. The journey was easier in daylight, without the fear of pursuit hanging over them, and they made good time. As they crested the final ridge and the cabin came into view, nestled in its small clearing, with smoke rising from the chimney that Zachary had stoked before they left, he felt something settle in his chest. This was home now, not the room above a general store in Lone Pine, not some imagined future where he was rich and successful. This place, with this woman, was where he belonged. They spent the rest of winter in the cabin, falling into rhythms that felt both new and ancient. Zachary learned the work of maintaining a claim, learned to pan for gold in the freezing streams, and to read the rock for signs of promising deposits. Delilah taught him to track game through the snow, to read weather in the movement of clouds, to survive in a landscape that was beautiful and deadly in equal measure. and in the evenings by firelight, they built something more precious than gold. They talked and laughed and planned for a future that grew clearer with each passing day. They kissed and held each other and explored the growing love between them with a tenderness that made Zachary's chest ache. When spring finally came, melting the snow and turning the forest green, Zachary rode down to Lone Pine. It was his first time back since the day he had been shot, and he felt strange returning to streets he had once known so well. People stared at him as he rode past, some with curiosity, some with respect. Word had spread about what he had done, about how he had exposed Marcus Dalton's crimes. He stopped at the general store, where the proprietor, a man named Samuel Chen, who had always been fair with him, greeted him warmly. "Good to see you back, Mr. Quinn," Samuel said. "We have been hearing stories about you." "I imagine you have," Zachary said. "I came to settle my account. I owe you for the room I was renting." "Nonsense. After what you did, exposing that crook Dalton, your money is no good here. Consider it payment for setting things right." Zachary tried to argue, but Samuel was insistent, and finally Zachary accepted with thanks. Before he left, he made one more purchase, a simple gold ring from the small collection Samuel kept in a case behind the counter. "Is this for who I think it is for?" Samuel asked, wrapping the ring carefully. "It is," Zachary confirmed. "Then you are a lucky man, Mr. Quinn. Delilah Thompson is one of the finest people in this territory." "I know," Zachary said. "Believe me, I know." He rode back to the cabin with the ring burning a hole in his pocket, nervous in a way he had not been even when facing down Marcus Dalton's guns. But when he saw Delilah working in the garden, she had started outside the cabin, her face turned up to catch the spring sunshine. All his nerves fell away. She looked up as he approached, smiling that smile that made everything else disappear. "You are back. I was starting to worry. How was town?" "Interesting," Zachary said, dismounting. Everyone wanted to talk about Marcus and the trial. Apparently he confessed to everything, rather than face a jury. He will be in prison for at least 10 years. "Good," Delilah said with satisfaction. "He deserves every day of it." "I saw Samuel Chen. He sends his regards, and I got you something." Zachary pulled the small wrapped package from his pocket, suddenly shy. Delilah took it, her expression curious, and unwrapped it carefully. When she saw the ring, her eyes went wide. "Zachary, I know we have not known each other that long," Zachary said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "And I know we have been through something that most people never experience, and maybe it is too soon or too fast. But I also know that I have never been more sure of anything in my life. I love you, Delilah. I want to spend the rest of my life with you, here in these mountains, building something that is ours. Will you marry me?" For a long moment, Delilah just stared at him, the ring cradled in her palm, and Zachary felt fear clutch at his heart. What if she said no? What if he had misread everything between them? Then she launched herself at him, nearly knocking him over, kissing him with a ferocity that left no doubt about her answer. "Yes," she said against his mouth. "Yes, yes, yes." They were married a month later in a simple ceremony in Independence, with Marshall Ross standing as witness and Mrs. Henderson providing a wedding cake that she swore was her grandmother's recipe. Delilah wore a new dress of pale blue cotton that made her eyes shine, and Zachary wore his best suit, cleaned and mended by Mrs. Henderson's skilled hands. It was not a grand wedding, not the kind that happened in big cities back east, but standing in that small church, holding Delilah's hands and speaking vows that promised forever, Zachary felt richer than any mining magnate. They returned to the cabin as husband and wife, and if anyone in Lone Pine or Independence thought it was strange that Zachary Quinn had given up his share of the mine to live in the high country with Delilah Thompson, they kept their opinions to themselves. Life in the mountains was hard, just as Delilah had warned. The winters were brutal, the work was backbreaking, and there were days when Zachary wondered if they were mad to stay. But there were also moments of perfect joy. Mornings when he woke to find Delilah still asleep beside him, her hair spread across the pillow. Evenings when they sat outside and watched the sun set over the peaks, painting the world in impossible colors. Nights when they loved each other with a passion that never seemed to fade, no matter how many times they came together. A year after their marriage, Delilah discovered she was pregnant. The news filled them both with joy and terror in equal measure. They were miles from the nearest doctor, and childbirth was dangerous even under the best circumstances. But Mrs. Henderson, when they rode to Independence to share the news, promised to come stay with them when Delilah's time drew near. "I helped birth half the babies in this territory," she said firmly. "Your little one will be just fine." She was as good as her word. When Delilah went into labor on a cold January morning, Mrs. Henderson was there, calm and capable, guiding Delilah through the long hours, until finally a baby's cry filled the cabin. "A boy," Mrs. Henderson announced, wrapping the squalling infant in blankets. "And a healthy one at that. Congratulations?" Zachary held his son for the first time with shaking hands, looking down at the tiny red face, and felt his heart expand in ways he had not known were possible. "He is perfect," he whispered. "He looks just like you," Delilah said from the bed, exhausted but radiant. "Same stubborn chin." They named him Thomas, after Delilah's father, and he grew into a strong, curious boy who loved the mountains as much as his parents did. 2 years later, they had a daughter they named Rose, who had Delilah's amber eyes and a laugh that sounded like music. The years passed in a blur of work and love and the everyday miracle of family. Zachary expanded the cabin, adding rooms for the children and a larger workspace for Delilah's herb garden, which had grown from a hobby into a small business supplying dried herbs and medicines to the general stores in both Lone Pine and Independence. The claim that Delilah's father had worked for so long never made them rich, but it provided enough to live on, especially combined with Delilah's herb business and the occasional work Zachary took on as a guide for people wanting to explore the high country. They were not wealthy, but they were comfortable, and more importantly, they were happy. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Zachary and Delilah left the children with Mrs. Henderson, who had become like a grandmother to Thomas and Rose, and rode up to the ridge where Zachary had first glimpsed the cabin all those years ago. It was summer, and the meadow was carpeted with wildflowers that swayed in the mountain breeze. "Do you ever regret it?" Delilah asked as they sat side by side, looking out over the valley. "Giving up the mine, the chance to be important?" Zachary turned to look at her, at the woman who had saved his life in every way that mattered. Her face showed the marks of 10 years in the mountains, lines at the corners of her eyes from squinting into the sun, a new strength in the set of her jaw. But to him, she was more beautiful than ever. "Not for a single second," he said. "You and the children, this life we have built, it is everything I ever wanted but never knew to ask for. I love you, Delilah Quinn. I loved you when you nursed me back to health. I loved you when you rode into danger beside me, and I love you now more than I thought it was possible to love anyone." Delilah leaned her head on his shoulder, fitting against him the way she had 10 years ago in that cave, waiting for darkness to fall so they could run for their lives. "I love you too," she said. "Thank you for staying. Thank you for choosing this life with me." "Thank you for giving me a life worth choosing," Zachary replied. They sat there until the sun began to set, painting the peaks in shades of gold and rose, and Zachary thought about the man he had been when he stumbled bleeding and half-frozen to Delilah's door. That man had been running from death, from betrayal, from everything that had gone wrong. The man sitting here now was running toward something instead, toward love, toward family, toward a future that was richer than any gold strike. Marcus Dalton had tried to destroy him, had shot him, and left him to die in the snow. But instead of ending Zachary's story, that bullet had been the beginning of something better than he could have ever imagined. It had led him to Delilah, to love, to a life that felt like redemption and blessing combined. Years later, when Thomas and Rose had grown and started families of their own, when Zachary and Delilah were old and gray and still living in the cabin they had shared for over 40 years, people would sometimes ask Zachary about that winter when Marcus Dalton betrayed him. "What would you have done differently?" they would ask. "If you could go back, knowing what you know now?" And Zachary would smile, reach for Delilah's hand, and say, "Not a single thing. Every scar, every hardship, every moment of fear and pain led me here, to this life, to this woman. I would live through it all again if it meant ending up right where I am." He meant it too, because that bullet in the snow, that betrayal that should have killed him, had instead been the hand of fate pushing him toward the greatest treasure he would ever find. The love of a woman who saw him at his worst and chose to save him, who stood beside him in danger and in peace, who built a life with him in the mountains that became home in every sense of the word. On a spring morning in their 45th year of marriage, Zachary woke early and slipped out of bed, careful not to wake Delilah. He walked outside into the dawn, breathing in the cold, clean air, and looked around at the world they had built. The cabin was larger now, expanded several times to accommodate visiting children and grandchildren. The garden was lush and well-tended. The claims still produced modest amounts of gold, though they no longer needed it as they once had. But more than any of that, this place was full of love. It was in every log of the cabin, in every flower Delilah had planted, in every tree Thomas had climbed as a boy, in every memory they had created over the decades. Delilah came out to join him a few minutes later, wrapped in a shawl against the morning chill. She slipped her hand into his, and they stood together watching the sun rise over the peaks, painting the world in light. "What are you thinking about?" Delilah asked softly. "About how lucky I am," Zachary said. "About how that day I got shot and ended up at your door was the best day of my life, even though I did not know it at the time." "I knew it," Delilah said with a small smile. "I took one look at you, bleeding and stubborn and refusing to die, and I knew my life was about to change. For the better? For the absolute best," Delilah confirmed. "You are my everything, Zachary Quinn. You always have been." He kissed her then, as the sun climbed higher and the mountains came alive with birdsong, and thought about how strange and wonderful life could be, how the worst moment of your life could become a doorway to the best, how betrayal could lead to love, how dying in the snow could be the first step toward really living. They had a few more good years together before age, and the harsh mountain winters began to take their toll. But even when their bodies grew frail, their love remained strong. They would sit by the fire in the evenings, holding hands and telling stories to their grandchildren about the old days, about the winter Zachary had stumbled through their door, and how Delilah had nursed him back to health. "And then, what happened?" the children would ask, eyes wide. "Then we fell in love," Delilah would say, squeezing Zachary's hand. "And we lived happily ever after." It was the truth, simple and profound. They had built a life from nothing, from a moment of desperate chance, and it had been more than either of them had ever dreamed possible. When Zachary finally passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 78, with Delilah holding his hand, his last thought was of gratitude for the woman who had saved him in every way a person could be saved. Delilah followed him less than a year later, and their children buried them side by side on the ridge overlooking the cabin, with a view of the mountains that had been their home and their fortune. The headstone, carved from local granite by their son, Thomas, was simple. Zachary Quinn and Delilah Quinn, beloved parents and grandparents together, always. But those who knew them, who had seen the love they shared and the life they built, knew that the true monument to Zachary and Delilah Quinn was not carved in stone. It was in the cabin that still stood, in the children and grandchildren they left behind, in the stories told around fires on cold winter nights, about the man who was betrayed and wounded in the snow, and the woman who nursed him back to health and, in doing so, found the love of her life. It was a story of the West, of hardship and survival, and people who were too stubborn to quit, even when quitting would have been easier. But more than that, it was a love story, pure and simple, the kind of love that transcends circumstances, that turns tragedy into triumph, that builds something beautiful from the ashes of betrayal. And if you go to those mountains even now, people will tell you that on certain spring mornings, when the light is just right, you can see two figures standing on the ridge, holding hands and watching the sunrise. They say it is just a trick of the light, shadows and mist playing games with the eyes. But those who believe in love, in the enduring power of two souls who chose each other against all odds, know better. They know that some loves are so strong they transcend even death, that Zachary and Delilah Quinn are still there, still together, still watching over the mountains they loved and the life they built from a single moment of fate in the snow.